Bonjour. Thank you for inviting me today to share some of my research about surrogate motherhood. Thank you to the Menason family for your support of my work all of these years. It has been very meaningful to me to be in touch with you. I'll talk today a little bit about the transition to motherhood of intended mothers through surrogacy. To begin, this talk is based on my ethnographic research, some of which was published in a book called Birthing a Mother, The Surrogate Body and the Pregnant Self in 2010. Over the years, I have continued to research surrogacy and have often written in collaboration with a colleague named Zsuzsa Berend from UCLA in sociology there, who has done research on surrogates in the United States and on their online conversations throughout the surrogacy process. Together, Zsuzsa and I have written several academic articles comparing and contrasting our research on surrogates in the US and in Israel. We've written about the way that surrogates think about motherhood and kinship, about the way that surrogates negotiate the process with their husbands and their children, and the way that they think about regulation in very different ways in Israel, where surrogacy is heavily regulated, and in the United States, where there is no federal regulation, but it is only state by state. From 2020, we began to collaborate on a graphic novel through which we translated our research findings into comic form. A Tale of Two Surrogates, a graphic narrative of assisted reproduction, talks about the story of Jenn, a California surrogate, and her husband Mike. Donna, a Tel Aviv surrogate, and her husband David, and each of them have 3 children. These two surrogacy families are partially based on our work, but they are fictional characters. They represent the demographics of the surrogates in our research who were married heterosexual women. The women in Zsuzsa's research, like most surrogates in the United States, were white women, whereas the surrogates in my research were Jewish women of both Ashkenazic and Mizrahi backgrounds. Today I'm going to talk about the maternal claiming process. Maternal claiming is a set of rituals through which the intended mothers designate themselves as the mother of the surrogacy-born child. The process of identity building and transformation of one's status into that of a mother is accomplished primarily through communication between the surrogate and the intended mother. This can occur in person when surrogate and intended mother live nearby each other, or through technology if they live at far distances and are only able to communicate through FaceTime or through Zoom. We contrast the transitions to motherhood of Sarah, the Israeli intended mother, who had a face-to-face interpersonal connection with the surrogate Donna, and Anne, who communicates with Jenn, often through phone and through video, even though they both reside in the state of California, but they live 6 hours apart by car. In our book, we portray both Sarah and Anne, the intended mothers, as women who have struggled for a long time with infertility. Each of the women have gone through IVF, had many failed attempts, and turned to surrogacy as a last resort. Here we see a portrayal of the long road of negative pregnancy tests, miscarriages, surgeries, and what the women describe as feelings of failure. As you can see, this circular process results in many negative pregnancy test results for Sarah, as she feels that the negative stamp is interpreted as failed, failed, failed. In the USA, the rituals of transition to motherhood occur from a distance. Intended mothers in the United States often can connect to the pregnancy and to their transition to motherhood by reading about pregnancy and fetal development, by journaling, participating in social media surrogacy groups and online blogging, and by preparing the baby's room as a ritual of confirmation. Here Anne tells Jenn about how she's already preparing the baby's room, even though they're just at the beginning of the process, as a way of connecting. Intended mothers in the United States often celebrate a baby shower during the last months of the surrogate's pregnancy, where their friends all bring gifts and celebrate their impending transition to motherhood. U.S. surrogates often take a role of actively trying to facilitate bonding between the intended mother and the fetus. In the United States, surrogates often try to encourage this bonding by sending playful updates to the intended mother of fetal development. Here, Jenn sends pictures of blueberries and says, "Hi, Anne, week 8 starts today. The babies are the size of blueberries." Surrogates in the United States also tend to send gifts to the intended parents throughout the process related to their journey. Often these gifts are cute little tokens of the journey to parenthood. Here, the surrogate Jenn sends a diaper-shaped cake to the intended parents, saying that she just had to send it to them as a token of their journey. Surrogates often communicate what they identify as signs that the baby is related to the intended parents and not to themselves. Here, Jenn at week 25 eats pickles and reports to Anne that she had these cravings for pickles, and this is proof that their baby has different tastes than her own. Surrogates often also encourage the intended parents to send recordings of their voices for the surrogate to play through headphones placed on the belly. As we see here, Jenn plays through earphones on her belly recordings of the intended parents telling stories to their baby, and Jenn assures the parents that she is not listening in so that they can have intimate time with their baby. These symbolic acts authenticate the intended mother's journey to motherhood, even when she is geographically distant from her surrogate. In Israel, many of these rituals take part differently because the surrogate and intended mother can frequently meet throughout the pregnancy. Intended mothers thus transition to motherhood by accompanying the surrogate throughout the pregnancy. They meet for coffee. They see one another throughout. The face-to-face interactions help the intended mother feel connected to the process of her baby coming into being. In the scene depicted above, we see the surrogate Donna saying to her intended mother that she doesn't need to buy new clothes for the pregnancy because she still has the clothes from her former pregnancies. But Sarah says, "Humor me. I want to do whatever I can to feel connected to the pregnancy." And then she says, "It lets me feel like I'm helping you carry my baby a little bit." Surrogates often encourage intended mothers in Israel to engage with their belly, to touch the belly, speak to the belly, feel the movements of the fetus in the belly. A growing intimacy between the two women develops as the pregnancy develops, and the women often talk about themselves as holding the pregnancy and holding the baby together. However, this necessitates a careful balance of boundaries so that the surrogates don't feel invasion of their personal space. In this scene, we depict the surrogate feeling stifled and suffocated by the intended mother who holds her a little too tightly. Documenting the pregnancy through photography also aids in the intended mother's process of maternal claiming. Here we see the selfie that they take after an ultrasound. Often in Israel, during the 7th or 8th month of the pregnancy, the surrogate and intended mother initiate a professional photography session in which they document not only the transition to motherhood of the intended mother, they also document the bond that has been created between them, their husbands, and their children, and one another throughout this process. Here, Sarah, as one of the intended mothers in my study, tells the photographer, "Thank you for doing this for us. We can use these pictures to tell the baby his story and show him that we were with him all the time." Carrying medical responsibility also adds to this process for the intended mothers. Participating in the surrogate's prenatal care is a crucial avenue in this way for advancing the maternal claiming. Intended mothers often manage the documentation, scheduling, and they feel that they have an essential role in the medical management of the pregnancy. They feel involved by attending almost all the appointments, including the embryo transfer. Here we see Sarah praying as the embryos are transferred to her surrogate Donna's uterus. Ultrasound often plays a significant role in the intended parent's grasping of the realness of the baby. Here we see the intended parents looking at the screen as Donna's husband, the surrogate's husband, takes photos of the entire process. The surrogates often step aside during ultrasounds to allow intended parents to take center stage and play the part of the parents who are going through this process, as the surrogates often talk about how they looked at the intended parents rather than looking at the screen, because that is the transition that they wanted to witness. Ultrasound photos become technovisual proof, representing the fetus and enabling the intended mother to symbolically hold her child. In this scene, we depict Sarah saying to Donna that she has taken the photos from the ultrasound and put them in her purse so that she can keep them close to her all the time. Intended mothers in Israel also often experience significant worry about the pregnancy, and surrogates often laugh and say this is a pregnancy they worried about less because there was someone else to worry. This worrying for the intended mother can paradoxically serve as a means of connecting with the process, but also reflects her lack of control. Geographical distance, however, and fear of loss can make intended mothers hesitant to bond often with the surrogate or to bond with their baby. In the story that we have here, we depict Jenn feeling very disappointed that Anne does not bond with her or with the baby as much as she had hoped. Anne does not arrive at all of the ultrasound appointments because of distance and also perhaps because of fear of loss. And Jenn says to her on the phone, "You know, it would be great if you could come to the next ultrasound. It's so fun to see your baby, and I'd love to see you too." At the birth, we witness a process that often I talk about in the form of passing the torch. The passing of the torch is a process in which there is a shift, a sudden shift during the birth and after, of establishing the intended mother as the unequivocal mother. Surrogates often talk about how they witnessed this happen in a sort of a spiritual or magical way the moment that the baby exits their own womb and is born and is handed to the intended parents. We've depicted this moment with a type of light or aura shining on Anne. Surrogates describe this moment of transition as a moment that they see as the most meaningful in the entire process. Intended mothers usually visit the surrogate in her hospital room and take photos of her holding the baby. They often bring the surrogate a meaningful gift to ritually seal the process, and often they bring gifts for the surrogate's children as well. Here we see Donna's intended parents, Sarah and Avi, bringing the baby to show her the baby and thanking her for all she has done. The tides have shifted, and they are now the ones visiting the baby and visiting Donna rather than Donna having the baby within her body. In Israel, the surrogate children usually also bring gifts to the hospital, to the baby, and to its new parents. These work as rituals of separation between the two families and mark the end of the process. Most important for the surrogates is to be acknowledged. Acknowledgement can be in the form of a thank you letter, photo album, or video of the process. In Israel, it's often marked by inviting the surrogate to the baby naming ceremony or to the circumcision ceremony for the newborn and thanking her publicly. In our book, we have depicted what surrogates imagine as the ultimate acknowledgement, the intended mother making a speech saying to everyone how much she is appreciative of the surrogate birthing her as a mother. Lack of acknowledgement, however, does not allow the surrogate to tell the story she had hoped to tell or had imagined herself telling. In our book, we tell the story of how the ending played out for surrogate Jenn and how she was disappointed in not being able to tell the story she had wanted to because of lack of acknowledgement in the way that she had hoped. So to conclude, the transition to motherhood for intended mothers through surrogacy is a complex process involving active maternal claiming practices, and these are possible through the relationship and open communication between the surrogate and intended mother. It's possible to create these connections over a geographical distance through technology, but it's easier when parties can interact regularly in person and when the intended mother can accompany the surrogate to medical appointments. I believe that if there was national regulation of surrogacy in France, it could aid in this process. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you to the Menason family. And if you're interested in more about my research and Zsuzsa's research and our graphic novel, this is the link to our website. Goodbye. Au revoir.